Here tonight. Yeah, okay.
Was this live? Yeah, it is. Should screech into it. Yeah.
If you'd like to put your name and email address, and I can send you. You have yours.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Kim Duffy with the Holiday Historical Commission. I'd like to welcome Adrienne White this evening. She's our night speaker, people that we've invited to Holiday, a lot of scholars and historians to come and talk about the history of our town. But Adrienne will be widening out the lens to look at not just Holiday, but wider Utah. She's a researcher and preservationist, but beyond that, she's also a detective of sorts. She loves the stories behind the front doors of old houses, and she's here this evening to tell us about what she finds.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, I am so honored to be here. First, I want to thank the Holiday Historical Commission. Come on in, David. First, I want to thank the Holiday Historical Commission for inviting me to speak tonight. There have been several incredible preservationists who have spoken in this series, David Ammett being one of them, in addition to Bim Oliver and Alan Roberts, who are all my friends and mentors. So I am truly honored to be among these incredible preservationists speaking to you all tonight. I also want to thank him for inviting me to speak. And I want to thank each of you for being here tonight, listening to my stories and sharing time and space together. Several of you I know, but many of you I don't. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Adrienne White. I run a company called House Genealogy, where I research historic homes and the people who lived in them, or at least that's how it started. It's blossomed into much more than just that. But tonight I'm going to be sharing some of the stories that I've discovered along the way as I've become a house historian, a preservationist, and researcher based in Salt Lake City. I think it's important to note before we jump into the presentation that much of my work is less about architectural styles and types and more about storytelling. So that's what this presentation is going to be like. So before we dive into my presentation, I want to tell you a little bit more about me and my history with history. As a kid, history was my absolute least favorite subject. I took all of my history classes online because I thought it was really just memorizing dates and learning about wars, which was not my favorite thing to do. But I've always dreamed of becoming a detective, and part of that, my favorite subject was math. And part of math, my favorite kind of math, was algebra. Solving for X was like becoming a detective. And what I do now is a combination of these things. I never knew that I would actually grow up to become a historian and a detective. I've always been in awe of historic homes and buildings, and that interest just peaked when I was living in the Avenues during quarantine. When we were secluded in our homes, I would walk around my neighborhood and just fall in love with these beautiful homes that I was surrounded by. In December of 2020, my husband and I bought our first home in historic Sugar House neighborhood, which ultimately led me to discovering my passion. Outside of the work that I do with my business, I am also involved as a member of the Historic Properties Committee for Preservation Utah, and I'm on the Board of Trustees for the Sugar House Community Council, as well as a member of the Land Use and Zoning Committee. So I mention this not to brag, I mention this to say that I'm an advocate for preservation in my community, especially in the Sugar House neighborhood that is undergoing a lot of rapid development at this time. Too much? Yeah, I agree. I feel like I was destined to become a house historian, but to be completely honest with you, it started with this obituary. About a week after my husband and I bought our house, my sister sent me this obituary on the same, okay, thanks. She sent me this obituary on January 7th of 2021, and it told me that someone died in my house that same day, 45 years to the day. And I was like, what? What did I get myself into? This sparked, she wasn't murdered, she died of breast cancer. This can be conversational if need be. But this sparked so much curiosity in me. I want to know about my house and every single person who's lived in it. And so I've been a researcher at heart. I thrive in the environment of digging into all sorts of information and getting lost in research. So when I went to the county recorder's office to do the chain of title research, to get a comprehensive list of the people who owned my property, that led me to learning a little bit more about the people who shared my space before me. Using that information, I was able to identify who built my house, a man named Gerald Roy Free, who actually built it as a rental for people who were working at the Hygeia Ice Company, which he managed. But the Fetchers, pictured here, owned my home for the longest amount of time, from 1950 to 1994, and Sarah passed away in 1976. This is the only photo I was able to find of them online, and because of that, I treasure it so much. After doing my chain of title research, I was able to find and contact the people who are still living, who lived in my home before me. I was able to ask them questions about things that happened in the house before I lived there. I was able to receive photos and memories that are just truly so special. This initial experience is what ignited my passion for the kind of work that I do now. I honestly couldn't stop looking at houses in my neighborhood and wondering what their history was as well. So that led me to researching houses in my area, like this one. If you're familiar with Sugar House, you may be familiar with this home. What you might not be familiar with is the history of this house. Fay Ray, on the right here, after doing a quick search in the digital newspaper archives, I learned that Fay Ray lived in this home in her childhood. She was one of the very first scream queens, and then she transitioned into making talkies, and she's best known for her performance in the 1933 version of King Kong. In my search, I was even able to find a photo of her sitting with Amelia Earhart, which is just really special. So when you look at this house, you know it's beautiful, but then when you look at it and you know its history, you feel a lot more connected to it. Likewise, this is another house near my own home in Sugar House, and with a quick search, I was able to learn that this house was filmed in Halloween 6. And I've never seen it. I probably should watch it. But what's interesting is that, you know, this house is magnificent, but it's also ordinary. And you wouldn't know that this was in a movie. And, you know, I just think that you never know what history a house holds until you start digging into it. And I feel like every single piece of information you learn feels like a surprise gift that you didn't know you needed. So I began to notice houses all around me, and this is one that is just absolutely spectacular. Is anyone familiar with this house? Yeah, okay. I actually did want to ask, does anyone live in a historic home right now? Has anyone lived in one before? Okay, thank you. Just curious to know. So this house, if you're not familiar with it, is located on Lincoln near the Smiths on 21st South in Sugar House. And it has some very interesting history associated with it, which we're going to dive into right now. So I just want you to look at this picture really quick and burn it into your memory. All right, so in my search for information about this house, I used the address to find newspaper articles about the home. This brought up a 1937 article showing that Anne M. Bradley opened a tea room with antiques. This article also taught me that the house was also called the Black Castle around that time, which I hadn't seen anywhere else in my research. So we're going to go back. And it really does look like a black castle, especially in the photo on the right. So then, I learned that Anne M. Bradley was associated with this home. So then I did another newspaper search for Anne M. Bradley. And boy, I was not prepared for the information I was about to learn about this woman. The photo on the left is associated with the photo on the left is her associated with the stories from the early 1900s. And the photo of her on the right is what she looked like when she opened the tea shop in this house. So I do my search about Anne Bradley, and I learned that she was having an affair with a former Utah senator named Arthur Brown when she was 30 and he was 60. Senator Brown's wife found countless letters between the two of them, and one of the letters indicated that her son, also named Arthur, born in 1900, looked just like him, and it also appears that they had a second child in 1903. At that time, Anne was married and Arthur was married, and they were married to different people. Arthur was supporting Annie and their sons for a time, but ultimately he abandoned them and she wanted revenge. So in October of 1906, Arthur was staying at the Raleigh Hotel in Washington, D.C. He was discovered in his hotel room with 2 bullet wounds in his stomach, and he ultimately died as a result of his injuries. Annie was acquitted of the murder charges by a sympathetic jury, and she lived the rest of her life in Salt Lake City and opened up a tea shop in this house. So she ran her tea shop and her antique store for 30 years in Salt Lake City. And, this was widespread news that she essentially murdered her lover. And she was able to continue living her life. And that is a story that most people do not know about this house. But now you all do. The story that most people know about this house is that it was associated with a very notorious group of polygamists in the 1940s. Joseph W. Musser, who in the middle newspaper article, the top right photo, that's Joseph Musser, he purchased this home as a place of worship and a meeting space for his fundamentalist polygamist group. According to a newspaper article, their church took up 4 rooms in this house, and the congregation consisted of about 120 faithful members. Musser was a leader within this group, having 4 wives and 20 children, and he was also the editor of the pro-polygamy publication called Truth Magazine. Has anyone heard of Truth Magazine before? Yeah. So he was in charge. 20 years later, the newspaper article on the right, the home was still in the Musser family. Joseph Musser's son, Guy, split it into apartments, which is very tragic in some ways. And one of the units caught fire, causing $10,000 worth of damage. So initially, in the newspaper articles, it was thought that the fire was caused by a water heater, but after further investigation, it was found that an 8-year-old boy was playing with matches in a bedroom closet, and that's what caused the fire. One of the firefighters who was working on putting out this fire, he got hit in the head with debris that was falling, and he had to be taken to LDS hospital as a result of his injuries. And I just want to take a moment here to talk about how lucky we are to have these historic newspapers to tell us the history that could have been lost otherwise. The people that we're studying today, we are very privileged to have these breadcrumbs of information through these newspaper articles. The people who study us are going to have a lot harder time learning about us and our lives because these types of things often don't make it into the newspaper. They're usually online, and everything's online, and it's really hard to find what you're looking for online. The things that happen to us, weddings, engagements, the things that we love to find in the newspaper from history is often not available to the masses. It's on social media behind private profiles. And so I just want to take a second here to appreciate the history that we can consume from these digitized newspapers. Do you have a question? So if for you, there's a really great resource called Utah Digital Newspapers, which is free. It doesn't have everything. I use newspapers.com, but it's a paid subscription. But if you're wanting to look into some stuff, Utah Digital Newspapers is a great place to start because there's no paywall that requires you to be invested. So one more thing about this property. So, yeah, looks really different. The most recent update about this home is that the majority of this block, consisting of 21st South, 1000 East, Elm, and Lincoln, is going to be developed. All the single-family homes and the small businesses on that block are going to be demolished. And so, if you're this is a topic that a lot of people are not aware of, and so it's important for me to let everyone be aware of what's going on. Those single-family homes and small businesses are going to be demolished for 238 new luxury housing units. The developers have said that they're going to preserve this Victorian home by turning it into office space and amenity space for the residents. And they've also said that they are going to protect it from being demolished and modified with an easement, but the easement has not been made official. So if this is a home that's important to you, I'm on the Sugar House Community Council and the Land Use Zoning Committee, so I will be aware of what's going on with this house. My business cards are out on the table, so if you want to be aware of what's going on with this home, you can always shoot me an email and I'll send you updates as they're coming. So in some ways, I'm very, very grateful that this home is being preserved. In other ways, I'm a little scared that it's going to have a lot of people coming in and out of it who may not understand the importance of preserving it as they use it. But let's just hope it goes well. So once I had done about a year of house genealogy research independently on my own, I launched my business in February of last year. And soon after, I was hired by the Ellerbeck Bed and Breakfast in the Avenues on the corner of 3rd and B. Has anyone been there before? Yeah, they have a cafe as well. So they hired me, and it was great. And so the owner of the bed and breakfast came to me, and she said, "This home was built by Thomas Ellerbeck for his plural wife, Henrietta Ellerbeck, in 1892. So you can see Thomas on the left. Henrietta is sitting on the left with the child in her lap. This is the only known photo of Henrietta Ellerbeck that I was able to find, so it's very, very special. And even more special about it is you see down at the bottom, she had a nickname, Eddie. And that's the only place I've seen that nickname, which is, you just never know what information you're going to learn. And it's so special when you discover something you've never heard before. You'll notice that in the middle here, I have a title called The Story That Never Was, and we're going to get into that. Bless you. After extensive research in several of the in-person archives throughout the city, I discovered the real origin story of this home, which was nothing like what the owners thought it was. Henrietta filed for divorce from Thomas in 1886 because he had neglected her and their children for at least a year. So she cited her request for divorce as cruel treatment. She was granted the divorce as well as alimony for the remainder of their lives. She had also previously owned some property that she sold to LDS College in 1891 for $25,000 and ultimately built this home on her own. So this story that the owner had been told was not true whatsoever. Henrietta and her children stayed in this home from 1892 until 1911. It was sold to William Francis Armstrong, who was the son of Salt Lake City Mayor Francis Armstrong, and his wife Edith Moyle Armstrong, who was the daughter of James Moyle. The Armstrongs lived in this home for much longer than the Ellerbecks, owning the home for 60 years before selling it to Betty Jane Dillon and William H. Dillon, who were doctors that practiced in the avenues. Through my search, I learned that 2 children, 2 adults, and 2 older adults have died in this home, including these 2 on the screen. When I tell people what I do for work, they often ask me, oh, are you going to haunted houses or, discovering homes with ghosts? And I'm not really the right person to ask. Maybe William and Edith are haunting the Ellerbeck, but I'm not the right person to give you that information. I can tell you if someone's died in your house, but I can't tell you if their spirit still lingers. So my business was featured on the Ion Utah KUTV news segment, which allowed people from other parts of Utah to discover that they could learn about the history of their homes through my house genealogy research process. I was approached by someone who lives up in the Wellsville area in Cache County. This was such a unique experience because of how the home was associated with the settlement of the area. In 1856, Peter Mon, also known as the Bishop of Cache Valley, led 25 people to make their encampment in a settlement they called Mon's Fort, which is modern-day Wellsville, named after Daniel H. Wells, who was also the mayor of Salt Lake City at a time. In 1859, Peter was called to help organize other towns and cities in the Cache Valley, so the leadership of Wellsville fell to his son, William H. Mon. The town of Wellsville was incorporated in 1866, and William was chosen as the first mayor. From January to October of 1889, he was imprisoned in the state penitentiary for his involvement in polygamy. The blue arrow is pointing to him, and he's sitting just below George Q. Cannon. Isn't that a fun photo? I just couldn't not include it. You may be wondering why I'm talking about the history of Wellsville and its first mayor. Well, in 1872, Mayor Mon deeded land to Timothy Fielding Parkinson, who built my client's rock home. Timothy is in the very center with the blue arrow pointing down to his head. My business name is House Genealogy for a reason, and this house is a great example of why. The ownership records of this home seem straightforward, with the last names consisting pretty much only of Parkinson and Jones. But when I started digging into the genealogical records, it was much more complicated than it initially appeared. Timothy Parkinson was married to Jane Greer Parkinson, who's to his right with the blue arrow underneath or above her head. In 1938, Jane deeded the land to Howard and Ethel Jones, who are in the right photo in the middle, sitting around their children, after they owned it for 66 years. So I said it was kind of complicated, and we're going to get into it. So Howard's full name was Daniel Howard Parkinson Jones. Ethel's full name was Elizabeth Ethel Parkinson Mon Jones. And I'm like, okay, they're both Parkinsons. She's a Mon. She's Jones because she married him. Where is this going? In my genealogical research, I realized that Howard and Ethel, husband and wife, shared the same maternal great-grandfather, Timothy Graham Parkinson, who's at the very top of the middle image. And Timothy at the top is the father of Timothy who built their home. Howard's maternal grandfather was Henry at the bottom middle, and Henry was the brother of Ethel's maternal grandfather, Charles. So the 4 men in the center are all related to Daniel and to Howard and Ethel in some capacity. Not only that, but Elizabeth was the paternal granddaughter of Mayor Mon and the paternal great-granddaughter of Peter Mon, the settler of Cache Valley. If it weren't for the genealogical side of my skill set, I don't know that my clients would really understand how much the owners of their home were intertwined and related not only to each other, but also to Wellsville's history. And I'm just super grateful to whoever put that genealogical photo together, because that's so amazing. So I just want to briefly mention something that I always really enjoy when I'm doing my research, which is finding people in their element. Most photos I find are posed in big groups at weddings or family functions like that, but rarely do you find someone at work wearing their work clothes, and this is such a special photo for me. Both of these are very special. Not only that, but when you find a newspaper article, which unfortunately he died walking to work in the evening, this article says, he worked at the morning milk plant in Wellsville for 22 years. And an article is great, but an article with photos is even better. It paints the picture of what you're reading. And it's just really, really special. Another thing that just really lights me up and gets me so excited when I'm doing research is when I'm able to find interior photos of a home for my clients, because it gives insight into layout. You can see the kitchen cabinets and the kitchen sink. You can see the wallpaper and the curtains and the calendars and the dishes. And you can really get a sense of the people and the lives that they lived in the space that you now inhabit. This client in Wellsville was especially lucky because I was able to find more than 20 photos of her home, whether it's an exterior photo just by itself, an exterior photo of the family standing in front of it, or interior photos of people, of the residents inside. That is very rare. So if you are planning on researching your home, I don't want this to be your standard. This is like the cream of the crop. Another fun project that I had the opportunity of researching was an adaptive reuse project for the newest Work Hive co-working space located in Sugar House, just off 21st South between 7th and 8th East, which stands on the land that used to be the Brigham Young Forest Farm. And it's cocoonery, where Brigham Young's wife Zina experimented with silk production. As a result of my research, I learned that Soren Jensen purchased some of the forest farm land, including the cocoonery, from Brigham's wife Zina in the 1880s. Soren's son, Hiram Julius Jensen, built this home in 1911 and incorporated the Hiram J. Jensen Company in 1921. Going on to build several hundred homes, offices, and apartments in Salt Lake City. They lived in this home until 1930, when they moved into their new home at 2730 Highland Drive, which was built on part of a 40-acre farm owned by Mary Fielding Smith. So if you think that your home has no significance, I swear it probably does. Some interesting story, some interesting person. It may not be enough to get your home listed on the National Historic Register, but that doesn't mean that your home doesn't have some incredible history associated with it. Their son, Hiram Angus Jensen, the one with the mustache, not so cute, but that's okay. He ended up moving into this home and eventually took over the role of the manager of the Hiram Julius Jensen Company. And before I start researching, I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. I have no idea what I'm going to discover. I'm always amazed by the fun and exciting things that I can find. And Hiram Angus Jensen's wife, Mary, submitted her jelly roll recipe to a recipe contest in 1949. And, if I had ever found something fun like this, associated with my home, I would absolutely, one, try the recipe no matter how gross it sounds, and two, print it, frame it, and hang it in my kitchen because of the special connection that it has to my space. After my news segment, the client who owns this home reached out to ask if I could help with a property ownership question regarding an alleyway that butts up to his land. He also had a question about the two homes that were on either side of his because they appeared to be practically identical and somehow connected to each other, but that connection was unclear to him. So through the research, I discovered that his house and the two houses on either side of his were owned by the Davis brothers, who also owned a grocery store of the same name, very close to where they all lived. So we've got Thomas, Alma, and Edward. I'm going to be coming back to them. So similar to the home in Wellsville, it took some genealogical research to figure out the relationships among the people found in the title search. You know, we've got Brown to Brown, Davis to Davis, Davis to Davis, but how are they all associated? So the mayor of Salt Lake City at the time was Daniel Hanmer Wells, who Wellsville is named after. Daniel Wells deeded 4 lots of land to Joseph Brown. Upon Joseph Brown's death, his estate was left to the heirs of his son, Samuel P. Brown, leading to Renee Brown Davis to having legal rights over those lots. Renee was married to Edward on the bottom. And Edward was the brother of Alma and Thomas. Renee sold each brother a parcel of land, and that's how they ended up having 3 houses next to each other. So Thomas built his house, Alma built his house, and Edward built his house, all at the same time. So Thomas lived in my client's home with his wife and 2 children, but they ended up going on to have 7 more, so they quickly outgrew this home. When they began to outgrow the home, they sold it to Thomas's older sister, Hannah Davis Bowring. I think it's just so fun to see how people are connected and how ownership records come to life through the stories of the people behind them. It's so much more exciting to see someone's name turn into a photo and then turn into a story. And that is really what I do with the work that I do. I had another client in Ogden also approach me with a mystery that she wanted solved. She wrote to me and said, "There's some conflicting information about when the house was built, which has brought on all kinds of questions." So the county records had this home listed as being built in 1943. When she filled out the application to work with me on my website, she said it was built in 1968. With further investigation from both the chain of title records as well as newspaper articles, I was able to identify the real build date as 1964. I sent this information to be corrected by the county, and it was, which is very exciting. If you've ever spent much time in Ogden, you might be familiar with this property, which was historically called Proudfit Place, named after Robert Lee Proudfit, who purchased the block when it was filled with weeds and surrounded by barbed wire. Has anyone seen this property in Ogden with this rock fence? Yeah? It's north of Harrison, off of 24th Street. Yeah. So this client actually wanted to know when her house was built, and then she wanted the full history done, and then she wanted a coffee table book. So I made her a coffee table book, which I have here. This is my copy because the font was so big. It was way too large. So if you want to look through it, you're more than welcome and to learn more history about this home. But next time you're in Ogden, I highly recommend you go north of Harrison on 24th Street, and you'll see it. It's just really, really amazing. So Robert Lee Proudfit, he worked tirelessly to create his own oasis in the city, and he owned this entire block. His favorite hobby was gardening, and he planted more than 200 varieties of trees, 500 rose bushes, and thousands of flower bulbs on his property. He hand-picked and hauled rocks from the nearby Ogden River to create rock structures on his property, which included the rock wall fence, which is in this photo right there. That's the fence with posts throughout, as well as the rock-built windmill in the photo on the right, a rock-lined lily pond just below the windmill in the photo on the right, and several gate entrances, which you can see a photo of that on the left. The large east-facing rock entrance contains 25 tons of rocks and steel, with 9 tons of that being from the top crossbar. Very impressive. I can't imagine bringing all of those rocks one by one, or probably not one by one, but you know what I mean, to build these structures. It really takes a lot of dedication, and it's just very impressive. So Robert was able to afford his property and lifestyle by running the Proudfit sporting goods business that his father had started. He eventually brought on his son, Robert Lee Proudfit Jr., to join the family business as well, and this business was located at a couple different locations throughout Ogden during its heyday. So my client's home was built by Robert's daughter and her husband after living in a different home on that block. I am not lying when I say I squealed when I found this newspaper article in the center. It was amazing. I might have cried a little bit. It's a Salt Lake Tribune article from 1970 about the Proudfit Place block, but it also has some really incredible information about my client's home. In that article, I learned that the rock entrances used to have wrought iron gates that were removed and repurposed as a railing in my client's home. Without this research, she would have no idea how special that railing is and how significant they are to the history of her property. When a client hired me to research a couple houses that he owns, I was excited to dig into their histories. Little did I know that I would discover that one of the houses used to be 2 stories tall before it caught fire. You'll find that tonight the theme is fire. I was so excited and lucky to find a photo of the house before the fire using genealogical research. And you can tell that these are, in fact, the same home by comparing the railing on the porch on the left, the shape of the window on the right, as well as just the general structure of the home below the window. When he got this email, he probably just about died. He had no idea that his home was 2 stories. And he said, wow, it used to be such an estate. All right, we have a special guest in the audience who actually used to own this home. When I first started researching houses, I was first taken aback by the big, grand homes, the ones on South Temple and in the avenues. And then I started wanting to learn more about ordinary homes and ordinary people. I'm not saying this house is ordinary, but it's a lot more ordinary than the ones on South Temple. I settled on this one and decided to dive in. Bert Leeds and Louise Penrose got married in 1917 and later purchased this home. It caught fire, of course, in 1928 and burned to the ground, including everything inside, which forced this whole family to move in with her parents a couple blocks away. I honestly cannot imagine all those people plus 2 more in a small sugar house home. Bert rebuilt the home over the course of 3 years while he was simultaneously also working as a teacher at Emerson Elementary School and running his father's sugar house planing mill, all during the Depression. In the rebuilt home, there were 3 bedrooms, one for the parents, one for the 4 daughters, 2 girls shared a bed, and another 2 girls shared a bed, and then one for the 3 sons. In this photo, the Leeds children range from ages 5 to 18, and they created a harmonica band. You may notice that one of the sons dies, but he's still in this photo. Their harmonica band performed for multiple LDS boards, the Salvation Army, the Veterans of Foreign Affairs, and the DUP, and many more. Bert went and served in World War I, and Louise encouraged him to take his violin, and he was very glad that she said to do that because it brought him a lot of joy in the hard times of war. There are advertisements saying that Bert was teaching violin lessons at this home. And I found a newspaper article as well as a death certificate saying that Louise passed away in this home in 1951. One of the Leeds daughters, Luana, married Harry Dominic Guido at the Leeds home in October of 1945. He was an Army private first-class soldier who served in the military for the United States during World War II. These photos are not only special because of the historical significance of the wedding itself, but also because they give us insights into what the house used to look like and the changes that have occurred since then. For example, a railing has been added to the stairs and stoop since 1945, likely due to the changes in code. How do these photos look to you? Do they look similar to what it looks like when you lived there?
The fireplace is exactly the same. The bookcases are exactly the same. When I lived there, all the original windows you see in this photograph. And then when I bought the house in 1982, it still has some of the original draperies.
Wow.
All the original wallpaper. Well, the wallpaper that existed.
Yeah.
Virtually nothing has been changed.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. Let's see. Thank you. Did you do that or did I? Okay. I had the privilege of being a house manager for a house in Preservation, Utah's most recent historic homes tour of the Federal Heights neighborhood. If you've never been to the historic homes tour, I highly recommend it. It's an opportunity to go into some really nice homes and see some really cool things and hear some really cool history. There's several people in the audience here who have been, if not volunteered, and I'm grateful for you all. The role of being a house manager entailed doing extensive research about the history of the home and interviewing the current residents. My research led me to learn that the first owner, Harry Hutchinson, sold some of his Ford stock to purchase the land for $1,000 and then build the home for $10,000 in 1929 before the stock market crash. Let's go back. This house was $10,000. Wow. That's good for them. I actually had the ability to meet with the last 2 owners of this home during my research for the homes tour. Not the owner who owns it now, but the owner before her. She was pleasantly surprised when she opened her front door to find Libby and Jenny Hutchinson in their 70s or 80s on her doorstep, explaining that their father had built the home and that they had grown up there. They were so overjoyed to be able to go into the home and see things in the home that hadn't changed since they were little girls. And it's just very heartwarming to hear a story like that. And I think it's because we all have a deep connection to the places that we live in and a deep connection to the places that we frequently visit. I believe that house genealogy research deepens those connections by investigating these untold stories of our favorite places and spaces. So I just wanted to thank you so much for being here and listening to my stories. And I would love to answer some questions if you have any. Thank you so much. Yes. Oh, that's so hard. I mean, my own house is probably always going to be my favorite, but outside of my own home, the Wellsville house was just very fascinating because it's so old. It goes back to settlement times. I'm sorry to say that when I went up to Cache County to look at their records, to do the chain of title research, I drove by the house, and it had been demolished and replaced with a different kind of home. And so I think the owner wanted to memorialize that history because it's now gone. Yeah. Good question. Yes.
Have you had the opportunity to do any of the homes in the holiday area? This area goes back quite a few years.
It does, and I haven't, and I would love to. So if anyone has a house they want research done on, we can chat after this. Yes.
Is the Jensen home still, I know it's like Greystone, but is it still in the middle of Greystone, or is it Jensen home gone?
I think it's still there. It's still there. Yeah. Condos. Yeah.
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's condos on all different levels. And those are the first condominiums ever. That guy invented the concept of condominium.
Huh.
That's another history article. The Greystone condominium.
Oh.
He was the one that correct me if I'm wrong, came up with the idea of condominiums. And they
Wow.
that management.
That's fascinating. That's,
Salt Lake Tribune article.
yeah, that's great. Yes, Cindy.
Your favorite go-to source?
Oh, Family Search, 100%. I'm on Family Search all day, every day. If you're unaware of what Family Search is, it's a free genealogical website hosted by the LDS Church. If you're doing any research on any building in Utah, highly likely you will find a wealth of information on Family Search. Not only photos, life histories, letters, all sorts of things like that, but most people have their census records already attached to them, to their profiles. So it's so incredible. It's incredible. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you so much. And my contact information is out on the table. And I really appreciate having the ability to share time and space with you. Thank you.